Time now for our Wednesday Listen Up segment, where we debate an issue of public interest. Tonight's proposition comes from Finlay Asher, who's founder of the social media channel Green Sky Thinking, which aims to explore sustainable aviation.
Flying is the fastest way to fry the planet. That's why I'm proposing a UK ban on domestic mainland flights. Both the Scottish and the UK governments have declared a climate emergency, and they recognise the need to rapidly reduce emissions. Flying is one of the fastest ways we can burn fossil fuels and produce greenhouse gas. Therefore, in order to meet our climate targets, we need to fly less, and journeys within the UK mainland are the low-hanging fruit.
And Finlay is here to debate his arguments with Jonathan Hinkles, who is Chief Executive of Loganair, the largest regional airline in the UK. Thanks both for joining us this evening. So, Finlay, it's a radical idea. Do you think you could get public support for this?
Well, I don't think it's that radical. I think the context around this is there's a climate crisis being declared by the Scottish Government and the UK Government, and COP26, the big international summit around climate change, is happening just a stone's throw away from here in a few months' time. So it's really important that we lead from the front in terms of that summit, because we're chairing it and it's in our country. It's a great opportunity. But also the Paris Agreement back 6 years ago, we committed to target 1.5 degrees of global warming. We committed to rapidly reduce emissions, but in the period between then and now, emissions have kept going up. And there was also this principle around equity and fairness introduced by the Paris Agreement, the fact that the high income, high emitters need to move faster. Okay. So that includes the UK and it includes people that fly. Okay. And that's why this is really important. I mean,
Jonathan, Finlay has spelt out, the scale of the emergency we're facing. He's not talking about all flights, he's talking about, UK mainland flights. Is this not a kind of a sensible way to make some kind of progress?
Not while there is no replacement for them. And I think you've got to be very clear of saying you've got to avoid the unintended consequences. So the whole airline industry is moving at a rate of pace that I've never seen before in over 25 years in the industry to address this. But it isn't simply about aviation. The whole transport sector's got to move as well. And if you look at the emissions level, for example, from UK domestic aviation, there's about 8 times more emissions coming from the rail industry and the ferry industry. So we've all got a part to play. And I think focusing exclusively on aviation is the wrong answer, particularly when the majority of domestic flights now, all those short routes like Glasgow to Manchester, those kind of flights have gone. They aren't going to come back. The flights that are remaining domestically are things like Glasgow to Southampton, Edinburgh to Newquay, routes that we fly, where an 80-minute flight, you're saying replaced with a 9-hour train journey, is a viable alternative, and it simply isn't. So I think the market and the way that the industry is moving itself is already taking out the very short flights overland. Those have gone, they will not come back. But the domestic flights that remain overland are ones that provide vital connectivity.
Okay, Finlay, I'll let you respond to that. These are vital flights.
Yeah, I suppose the main point there is there's other sectors that also produce emissions, and they look like they produce more emissions than flying. So the first principle is, of course, we need to reduce emissions in every single sector. We can't say, I'm not focusing exclusively on flying. We definitely need to move away from more public private vehicles towards more public transport on the road as well. We need to take action across all sectors. And the problem is, aviation, it looks small, but that's because very few people use it. If you're traveling somewhere, it's more energy intensive, it's more emissions intensive, and it's also the high income individuals. It's not your average person that's flying either in general. So what we need to do, the other thing is just the preferential treatment the industry gets, the tax breaks for fuel. If we taxed aviation fuel at the same rate we tax petrol and diesel, the average person filling up their car, we could raise an extra 10 billion across the UK that we could spend on other things and help Jonathan, stimulate the economy.
So aviation fuel is already effectively taxed through the emissions trading scheme, and that currently accounts for around a 20% cost. So if what you're advocating is that we should exchange the emissions trading scheme for a tax on aviation fuel, I think every airline in the UK would absolutely support that. But I don't think it'll make the fundamental difference that you're seeking. And I would disagree very strongly with your notion that only people on high incomes are flying. I think if you look at the demographic, there is a significant range of people who are travelling for all sorts of reasons, particularly visiting friends and families, split parenting across the country. And the kind of journeys that are there, that are being flown, which are the longer flights, are in the UK 80 minutes or so, to replace those with road or rail journeys. And you also look at the rail journeys. If you're saying, right, that's where we're going to push people to, less than half of the UK rail network is electrified. The remainder is running on diesel.
Yes, I mean, Finlay, what about the alternatives? I mean, is the infrastructure that's there already for the trains, is that good enough?
No, it absolutely needs to be better, and the government needs to move faster to improve public transport. That's a big reason why, if we give subsidies to airlines, to aircraft, most people don't take a train and fly because they're saying, but it's cheaper, you can't expect me to pay more and it takes a bit longer. So we're literally not incentivising the right behaviour. A big problem with the fact that we can fly is we then shortcut the public transport that we're taking, and that doesn't get the investment and the attention that it deserves. So you have seen, I'd say, us move backwards on that sort of thing, but that's where we desperately need to improve, and we need investment, and we need to really focus where we spend our money.
But certainly from a train perspective, train fares are not low across the UK. And I think there's another really important point that you're saying about the tax breaks for aviation. We have air passenger duty, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with from your time in the industry. That's over $3 billion a year emitted in taxes to the Exchequer.
Let me finish.
But the level of that tax is the highest of anywhere in the world, I think with the possible exception of Mali in Africa. So the aviation industry is already subject to a punitive tax regime. That isn't driving the behaviours that you're trying to advocate.
Jonathan,
it will.
Can the aviation industry do more? What are you doing to offset the carbon emissions that are created? So
Loganair has become the first UK airline with what I would call a comprehensive environmental management plan, our Green Skies programme that we announced earlier on this year. We've committed to being fully carbon neutral by 2040, using full technology benefits from electrical and hydrogen-powered aircraft as those technologies are tested and they become available. In the meantime, until we can get to that, we are using an offset programme to take the emissions, the same amount of carbon, out of the atmosphere as generated by each and every flight. And we've become the first airline that actually mandates a ticket price surcharge to relate that environmental cost of flying to the economic cost of flying.
But you don't think that's enough, Finlay?
So I've worked in the aviation sector. I was an aircraft engine designer. I was working in future programmes looking at some of these future concepts. And with electric battery or hydrogen electric aircraft, you're really limited on the amount of passengers you can take and how far you can go. And it's really not a solution anytime soon for replacing most of the flights that you'll see happen, particularly the longer domestic flights. So the second thing is carbon offsetting. All carbon offset schemes so far have demonstrably been shown to have really poor verification. They're not effective and they're far too cheap. So we talked about the emissions trading scheme. It doesn't apply to most emissions. Airlines have a lot of exemptions and the cost is so low compared to the future cost of removing those emissions.
And we'll have to leave it there, but fascinating discussion. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.